Hey everybody, welcome back. Today is going to be a little bit of a bean spilling video. I'm going to spill the beans, so to speak, and let you guys in on some development that's been taking place regarding this little speaker here that I know you've seen in some of my videos. You've seen it set up in my listening room. Ron Bernay's got some of these over there at his place. Been using them as a reference. He's talked about them a little bit. I've talked to him about them a little bit, and we did a live stream the other day, and there were some questions brought up about these speakers. And so today I'm going to do what's probably part one or out of 2 or 3 videos that I'm going to shoot on this. Today I'm going to lay the groundwork and talk about how this began. Like, how did I get to this point, and what is it? And then I'm going to do some videos with Ron, and we're going to talk more about some of the development process and some of the end result and how this thing really sounds and why I feel like it's going to be a new benchmark in the industry. And there definitely is some technology that's gone into the development of this product line and into this speaker that has never been implemented before in a loudspeaker. And it's things that take it yet another step over the top. And in some ways, I'd have to say this is my favorite stand-mounted speaker of all time, like by a big margin, and maybe even a favorite speaker. It's that big of a deal. And so it's something that's in development. It's going to be offered through GR Research. It's only going to be offered fully assembled. And I've done it in conjunction with Ron at New Record Day. And Ron has had a ton of input on this thing. It's almost like a dream speaker for him. He's been in on kind of the development process, the design process, the aesthetics of how should it look, and even the naming of the speakers. He's getting to be involved in all of that. And so a lot of the credit goes to Ron in kind of the development of this whole project. Now, I'll say up front, and I want to make sure this is clear, Ron doesn't have any financial stake in the development of any of this stuff. He's not making money off of it. We're not partners. He still wants to remain neutral as a reviewer, and he's only giving his professional input into the development of this product line. He's not making money on this in any way, form, zero. So don't think that in future reviews or something, he's got something to gain. He has nothing to gain. If he's over the top and he loves it, it's because he loves it and it's that good. It's not because he's got a financial gain of some kind. So wanted to just get that out there right off the bat. Now, this is going to be the first of 3 models. This is a prototype, and the finished model is going to look a little bit different than this. As you can see, we've got one of the LGKs up top here, little 3-inch wideband driver. We've got an M130 right below it. In this case, we've got solid hardwood panels on the side, and the hardwood goes right out to the edges. In the production model, this base section here is going to have a round over on the sides, just like it has on the top. The hardwood sides don't come all the way to the front, but they're going to have a big round over too. So think of it as a double round over instead of just one big round over that we're trying to match. So it's heavy as can be. There are multiple chambers in this thing because there's multiple drivers on this thing. There's an LGK on the back side as well. The lower section where the M130 is ported. We've got a little airspace that's very small behind this driver, and then a sealed airspace that's quite a bit bigger behind the front driver. This one is only playing top octave ranges, first order filter on it, so it's playing down as low as it possibly can without the sound wrapping around the cabinet and becoming an interference with what's on the front. And yes, it is really heavy. It is a tank in all directions. It's really thick, it's really hard, and it's lined with no res. There are no cabinet resonances in this thing, so a lot has gone into this. I'll come right up front and say imaging and soundstage layering is second to none. Like, it's better than any speaker that I've ever heard, and for a number of reasons, and we're going to go through that kind of beginning to end. Vocal region in this thing is better than anything I've ever heard at any price point. I mean, it's unbelievable. And this isn't hyperbole. I'm not trying to hype the product. You're going to find out, and you're going to find out for sure. So in the meantime, like I said, I'm spilling the beans today, laying the groundwork. I'm going to tell you how we got here and what's coming. And it's in production right now as far as cabinets being made. There's 100 pairs of these being made, just a starter run. This is the first model. There's going to be 2 more right along behind it, and then more with this coming. So it's getting there, and I wanted to make sure that all the things are in place, and some of this new technology that I've gotten my hands on and have helped with development of putting this into a speaker. I wanted to make sure it was going to take place before going out there and sticking my foot in my mouth and say it's coming. Now, these are only going to be available fully assembled. They're not going to be kits. They're not going to muddy up the kit market. This is something going to be completely different, only fully assembled and ready to play. And a lot of that has to do with the way it's assembled and the things that are going inside of it and a whole bunch of stuff. So, now, how did we get there? I'm going to put like a pause here, and I'm going to move some other speakers up here, and we're going to kind of go back to the basics, like to the beginning of full range driver development here at GR Research, and let's figure out how we got there. And we're going to take some steps, but it's going to be a fun journey. So hang on. All right, we've got a few more speakers sitting up here around me now, and this is going way back. These are some speakers that I used to sell using the little original LGK drivers. And I'll say this, back when GR Research first started, my business partner and I, we tested everything, like every driver that we could get our hands on, and a lot of wideband or full range drivers. And specifically, we were part of some feedback that we were given Tangband in their early days, right as they first started as a company. We were probably one of the first companies they dealt with, and they were giving us their wideband drivers, and we would test them and listen to them and compare them, and we would give them feedback, and they were doing different models, and then they did some production models for me that I used in Epiphany Audio that were some 4-inch wideband drivers and things. And so I've got a pretty good history with these different wideband drivers, and then since then I've tested and measured everything, anything that's out there from just about every company that does a wideband driver. I've done some work on it at one form or another. So there are pros and cons to doing a wideband driver. Notice I'm saying it's a wideband driver. It's not full range, because no driver is really going to play 20 hertz to 20 kHz. That's what we consider full range. You're not going to get that out of one driver, but you can use them as wideband drivers. And there's pros in that having one driver do all of that. It has a certain coherency. It has a certain time arrival aspect that's coherent. So it has advantages in the soundstage and imaging and things like that to a degree. The cons are you gain things by going one way and you give up in the other. It's like trade-offs. You go the other direction, you get advantages, but you give up disadvantage to go in the other direction. And what I'm specifically referring to is size of the driver. When you get into bigger and bigger wideband drivers, and they have some out there like 15 inches in diameter, which is the craziest, stupidest thing to try and get a big driver to play all the way. And some of them do with little whizzer cones in the center. With the addition of that, they'll play high, but there's so much moving mass there, so much stored energy. The compromises fall apart, and you wind up with breakup in the upper frequency ranges and stored energy and things that are just, they completely fall apart when they start getting too big. And when they get big, the off-axis falls apart. In other words, anytime a driver is playing a wavelength where the wavelength that it's playing is bigger than the width of that diaphragm. In other words, the wavelength is longer than the diaphragm is wide. It is in what we call a beaming range or beaming frequency. So it has no off-axis response. And the bigger that driver gets, the faster that off-axis rolls off. So, a 6-inch wideband driver or an 8-inch wideband driver, as soon as you move off-axis a little bit, all the highs are gone. Like, you have to keep it aimed right at your head to have highs. Now, you can make the driver smaller and smaller, and you can get to where those wavelengths at which it's beaming are really high. In other words, you can start then moving off axis and you still have really good off axis response. So you think, okay, it's better to use a smaller driver. And it is in some ways. What you give up is surface area. You know, you only have so much surface area and so much X-Max. It'll only play so low. It'll only move so much air. You get beyond that point, you can't move any air. It won't play very loud. So there's give and takes. So somewhere along the ways, there was a company that sent me some samples, and one of them in particular was really good. And so I contacted them back. I said, okay, this is something we can work with, but I want you to change this, this, and this. And they did, and it worked out really well, and it became this driver. This is the original LGK, and it's called LGK because it's a Little Giant Killer, and we called it Little Giant Killer for a reason. It sounded really good. Like this little speaker, and we put it in this little ported box here, sounded way better than I had any right to. It's like there's no way that can sound that good, that coherent, that fast, that clean, that everything except deep bass. Now, this model with 3 dB down to 80 hertz into this ported box, and there's a big port on the back of it, and this one still has a bracket on the back because I had it hung on the wall. And the larger port had no port noise at all, tuned to 80 hertz. Sounded fantastic. You couldn't play it too loud, though. It would run out of X-Max. That's typical with any speaker out there. That's what happens. That's what they do. So it went from this to, okay, let's add some drivers below it. Like, let's add a couple of these below it to do bass. And then we wound up with what this one was. This was the Skinny 6, which is a 6-driver design. And I had a center channel version that had 5 drivers, and it was called the Flat 5. And I built some of those things, and we sold a bunch of them. I put them in my little theater system. They sounded really good. Now, what they did was, on the center channel, there was one wideband driver in the center, and there was 4, 2 on each end that was in a ported box that had a little bit of bass response. This one, the Skinny 6, called the Skinny 6, it had 6 drivers. 1 full-range driver, and then you can't completely see it here, and it doesn't really matter. There's 4 woofers below. It's in a ported cabinet. And that 4 drivers is covering the bass. And then on top of that, I decided, you know what, I'm going to take it yet another level. And what I did was I added a driver to the back of it. So it had a driver in the front, driver in the back. We limited the range that the one in the back would cover so that it wouldn't interfere with the one in the front. The result, crazy good imaging. Like, oh my goodness. Good vocal range, good detail, really transparent, sounded like an open baffle speaker. It's like, wow. So I contacted the company. I said, we need to order more of these drivers. These drivers sound fantastic. Well, at that point, they couldn't get some of the materials they were using in the originals, and they sent me some more samples, but they just weren't at the same level. And so I went through a couple of years where I was trying to find a company that could make another driver like this for me, that at that quality or better, and it took forever. And I went through several companies. Finally, good old Peerless there in India, I went to them and brought them the project in. After a lot of samples, we finally wound up with this little wideband driver that has a beautifully smooth response, and it sounded really, really good. In fact, I'm going to take a little pause here. I'm going to move these old speakers out of the way. I'm going to bring in some of the new models with the LGK 2.0, and let's talk about this driver because it's part of the journey that got us to where this thing wound up. So let's move some stuff around. Okay, like I was saying, development on this little driver took a long time. And this version that they finally got us that we signed off on and we really liked had a little shorter voice coil than I wanted. It has a little more limited excursion, whereas the original 1.0 had 2.5 millimeters X-Max, so pretty long voice coil. But it really wasn't linear over that whole range. By the time you got it out there a little bit, the surround was limiting just about how far it would go. In this case, it wasn't limited by the surround. It was just limited by the voice coil, which was 1 millimeter. So you couldn't play it down low very hard before it ran out of X-Max. But, oh my goodness, did this thing sound good. The speed, the detail of this version, the vocal region, the settling time was stupid fast. And one of the reasons is the smaller, lighter weight voice coil reduced moving mass. I think the moving mass on this came to 2.5 grams of moving mass. So think about the size of a woofer that would typically be handling some vocals, like a 5.25-inch woofer or 6.5-inch woofer, and the amount of moving mass, like a really good new woofer from Purify. Great built woofers, not really nicely done, but 16, 17 grams of moving mass versus some of our 6.5s and stuff. We're at like 7.5, 8 grams of moving mass, something like that. Really lightweight. But this is over the top. 2.5 grams. Think about this. An average paper clip is about 1 gram. So not a lot of moving mass weight. And that's part of the reason for just how clean this thing sounds. And so we got one that we really liked, and we were doing test boxes. We were 3D printing test boxes so that we could measure and test and see what it's doing and change variations. And we wound up doing some little boxes like these you see here. This one's just gorgeous. Killian made some in a quilted maple. I got 2 of these. The veneer's bubbled up on it a little bit, but good grief, you look at the whole cabinet and the way this thing looks, it looks like the whole thing's a bubbled maple or something. So if somebody wants a pair of these, let me know. Got 2 of these boxes still. This one I think we have 1 of left, but we designed this to be a desktop speaker. And man, did it excel in that application. These are the perfect size little desktop speakers. So we even designed a little stand that holds them up off the desk about like this here. It looks really good. In fact, you know what? I'm going to grab one of those. I have it sitting here handy. Here we go. Little stands that we had made. They would hold these things up. Man, these things crushed it for a desktop speaker. They really did. And I say crushed it. I'm talking about sound quality here. And they do have a limited X-Max. They are limited as how low they can go. 3 dB down in the mid 80s and maybe low 80s in some applications. But you're not going to play these real loud. We found that due to the limited X-Max, about 10 watt peaks is about all you can really hit them with. But when you've got a pair of them on your desk 3 feet away from you, and they're 85 dB each, plus 1 is 88 dB for the pair with 1 watt. And if you put 2 watts on them, you're at 90, 91 dB levels that it can play with a couple of watts. That's plenty loud when you've got something sitting right in front of you, and they sound really good. Now, if you wanted to really beat on these things and play them a little hard, you have to filter the lows out. In fact, one day I had Ron Bernay come over, and I had a pair of these set up on stands about, 5.5 feet away from the listening position, and I had him close his eyes. I said, close your eyes. Come right in here, sit right here. Just listen to this real quick. And I had it blended to some big servo subs, like 3 12-inch servo subs per side. Had them balanced out nice and low to these little wideband drivers that are sitting on stands. It's right out there in front of him. And, of course, he loved the sound. It was incredible. It was holographic. I said, okay, open your eyes. And he's looking at a little pair of desktop speakers right in front of you. Completely crazy how good the thing sounded. Now, remember, this was filtering the bottom end off of them. So that kept them from seeing very much excursion. I'd say us filtering everything from 80 to 100 was getting pulled out of them. At that point, you could hit them with about a 30 watt peak, and that was about it. And so you're still limited on the amount of output you could get out of this thing just due to excursion limitations. So at that point, I started thinking, you know what? I've got an idea. I think I can build on this like I did before. In fact, let me get some more drivers up here and let's build on this. Let me show you some stuff. Okay, lots of switcheroos in this one, huh? So I had a bunch of these woofers in stock. I got them in a little buyout, and I didn't have a whole lot in them, and they're good little woofers. if you use them within a lower frequency range. And it's a little metal cone driver, and they don't need a lot of airspace, especially in a sealed box. So we did this. We added a little woofer below these things. I crossed them with a first order slope at about 350 hertz. So we really took some of the bottom end out of this, but still handled everything in a wideband range. And it still made a really good desktop speaker. Again, it's sealed, tube connectors on the back, and this one you can beat on a little bit. You can put some power on it and not worry about overexerting the drivers or anything like that. So, sounded really good, really good. Like, man, you can really put a little juice on these things, and they sound fantastic. And I thought, okay, not only could you use these as a desktop speaker, but just as a small monitor. Like, man, you could use these in a home theater, a little small theater, man. Because it's got good controlled dispersion. This 3-inch wideband driver has good off-axis response, but it's more controlled. It's not as wide as a small tweeter. And so in rooms that are a little less treated, this could be a perfect idea for those. And then I began to build on this a little bit. I thought, okay, how about if I did a center channel version and I used 2 of these woofers, and I came up with this. This was the LGK 2.1. So then, oh, this little sucker's heavy. LGK 2.2. So we got one now that can be used more as a dedicated center channel. It's got that long look everybody wants, and a wideband driver right there in the middle of it, handling, again, everything from 350 and up with a low order crossover. Now, it's got good off-axis response too. You can move well off-axis, and because that wideband driver's handling everything, it's got great coverage area. So, great sound, perfect for that application. Small theaters, oh my goodness, this thing's over the top. Okay, couldn't leave well enough alone there. Couldn't stop just there with the 2.2 model. Came out with the 2.4 model. And in the 2.4 model, we put 4 of these woofers below one of the wideband drivers. So in a small, thin tower, one of these at the top and 4 woofers below. And then I took it a step further and I did something like I did on the Skinny 6s, and I added another one of these drivers on the back and let it play all the upper ranges. So suddenly things went from good to scary good. Like, oh my gosh, this is getting crazy. The level of just how holographic everything sounds is just next level. And the vocals in that little wideband driver is just scary good. And so Ron got the 2.4s. After he heard them over here, he says, I want these at my house. So he took them to his house, and he used them in several videos. There were some expensive speakers he was reviewing, and I'm not going to mention the name. In fact, I don't even remember what they were called. And there were some issues with that speaker, and he did some sound clips, and then he threw the old LGK 2.4s up there, and he did some sound clips using those, but he didn't say what they were. He just said compared to a speaker that I've got here in the house. And he wanted to point out some of the problems that he was hearing with the real expensive speaker. And the little LGK 2.4 just crushed it. They sounded so good in his room. Oh my gosh. He has, as you know, a perfectly well-treated room, and things are holographic in that room to begin with. And he had those things well out into the room, and it was really holographic. And you can hear in the sound clips just how good that thing sounded. It was, wow. And so everybody wanted to know what the mystery speaker was, so he did a follow-up video where he made a comparison, but he didn't compare the LGK 2.4 to some big name brand something. No, he didn't want to do that to any company. So he did it to me. He compared the 2.4 to his favorite stand-mounted speaker, his reference stand mount, which was the GR Research XLS Encore. So he compared one of our products to another one of our products. And granted, I've heard that XLS Encore beat up on a lot of speakers, especially at Ron's house. Like, there's a lot of things you can listen to and think, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And you put the Encore back up and you think, okay, that's next level. You know, especially in imaging and soundstage layering. It is cleaner. It maintains a lot of those spatial cues, and it's more holographic in the way it sounds. Even Jay Lee, when he did a review on some of the Encore kits that he's got his hands on, he compared them to like a $9,000 Sonus Faber stand-mounted speaker, and he admitted that the imaging and soundstage layering was much better in the Encore. It's like that's one of its qualities. Well, Ron made those comparisons, and it beat up on the Encore in soundstage and imaging and in the vocals. Oh my gosh, the vocals in that 2.4 are just unreal. And if you don't believe me, go listen to those sound clips. And he's doing good sound clips. He's figured out how to get the microphone on the left and right speaker, dual mics, and get them fairly close, like within 30 inches to 3 feet of the speaker. And so he's catching more of what's coming out of the speaker and not so much of the room. And even when we were here in my listening room with the 2.4s, we did some recordings to hear, how the recordings are sound and how the sound clips sound. And we tried a lot of different techniques in how to capture it. And I remember listening to Vienna Tang, and when we play her through those 2.4s, it sounds like she's right here in the room. It's like, oh my goodness, she's right here in the room. And you can hear that in the recording. If you listen to the original file, it's like, okay, that's a great recording in the studio. And then you play it back to the 2.4s, and it sounds like a studio recording that was made in my room. It's like it took the qualities of the room and added that to the studio recording. The recording is phenomenal, and it sounds even in the recording like she's in this room. And you can hear that in his sound clips, and it was amazing how good those things sounded. It's like, man, this is scary good. If you want bang for the buck, especially if you got a small room, those speakers are it, man. I mean, it's kind of a lost leader for us. We don't have much in those things because we didn't have much in these woofers, and the little LGK 2.4s are not that expensive to have them made, especially when we have 1,000 or more made at a time. So we're just not adding a ton of markup to it and throwing out a heck of a deal. This model, 2.1, it's like, man, you can make a whole theater out of these things for not much money, and it sounds phenomenal. So they're already setting a new benchmark. But Ron listened to it and he said, well, the only thing is the Encore has better bass. Like, these were designed specifically for not loading the room. The 2.4, using 4 of these little woofers, they're in a sealed box. They're not designed to play down low. They're designed to be used in a room to where any bigger speaker you put in there, you get a lot of room gain and a lot of boominess. Whereas with those, you won't, and then you can use your sub to balance it out. That's specifically what they were for. If you've got that application, you definitely need to look at those models. But as a standalone pair, it's like, okay, if they just had a paper cone woofer underneath it that would play down lower, then this could be like a whole home run speaker. Like, this could be a game changer. And Ron says something to the fact that my dream speaker would be if we combine the Encore with the LGK 2.4. And I said, well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because I've been thinking about doing that. And so that's what led us up to getting into what we began to collaborate on and work on. In fact, let me move this out of the way, and let's talk a little bit more about where it went. So hang on. All right, after another little switcheroo here, got a few drivers set out here on the table. Let's talk a little bit about where this thing went. So first thing I did was make this little LGK driver with one of the M130s. And for several reasons, I could do this and still keep it small. So like if I wanted a stand-mounted speaker, this is the right size. It'll 3 dB down to 55 hertz, maybe a little lower. And it just hit the spot. So like for a stand-mounted speaker, this was ideal. And it's been over the top. I mean, it really is. It's set new standards in a lot of ways. And some of it has to do with a lot of different things all coming together. First of all, having the signal covered by one driver. So we've got a time and phase coherency there that is a little better than it can be when you've got a mid-tweeter. And I'm pretty good at designing crossovers that can take a mid-tweeter and blend them in a way where we're not creating a bunch of phase shifts and where we're keeping the drivers in phase over a wide range. So like as you move up or down, they're still in phase over a wide range, and the in-room response is still the same in every direction. And I'm pretty good at doing that. But going to a one driver that's handling all that went next level. And I wound up putting a second order filter on the bottom, and we're crossing it at 250. So we're letting this thing go down as far as it can, and then just kind of brick walling it with a very steep second order filter. And then I think we're doing third order filter on the woofer below it. We're bringing it in and kind of matching that drop and crossing it low. And I was a little worried still that we're letting this go down pretty far with this limited X-Max. But as Ron's proved to me, we can beat on this thing with quite a bit of power, and I think the M130 would probably give out just about at the same power levels as what this upper one would. And we've played them pretty hard. Ron had these set up in there the other day with some Shit Audio Tiers, which is some big monoblocks. 300 or 400 watt monoblocks or something. I don't know. I've had them over here. They're a good, powerful little amp. And he cranked up some Danzig, of all things. I'm like, Danzig? Oh, man. And cranked it up, and it was getting after it. Of course, we had them blended to double treble, so there was two 12-inch servo subs on each side, blended flat. And then Danzig opened his mouth. It's like, of all people, you don't think of, beautifully recorded vocals, you don't think Danzig. But he opened his mouth and he said, "Mother," Oh, he's right there in the room. He's right there. It's like, oh my goodness. It's real. He's right there. And so part of that is the coherency. Part of it is the time arrival. Everything is in phase and where it's supposed to be. That's part of what's making this thing image like crazy. The other thing is baffle surface, like baffle width. Anytime you add surface area and you get bigger and bigger baffles, probably the one big main faux pas I see out there in the open baffle world, these guys start putting wideband drivers on great big baffles because they're trying to do some front to back wave separation to get them to play down low enough. I understand that, but when you create that big surface area, you have a lot of surface reflections, and it'll sound like it's playing from that surface forward. When you wind up with something that's not very wide, and you've got minimal surface reflection, and you've got a little more controlled dispersion on top of that, you don't hear a lot of reflection off the baffle as if the sound is coming from the speakers. It's much more transparent. Then you add the driver to the rear, and suddenly now it's taken on the sound of an open baffle speaker. It is, you hear things radiate within the room instead of just at you from the speaker, and it sounds really, really real. I mean, crazy levels. It's spooky. And so it's got a whole bunch of things going for it. And then on top of that, we're adding in some new technology that improves image focus. And that takes things over the top. Like, okay, we went so far in one direction. And then we have, of course, no moving mass, 2.5 grams of moving mass. So the settling time is really fast. So I know a lot of people think, well, something that's real lightweight accelerates really fast. No, that's not what we're trying to do when you look at it moving mass. It's going to accelerate at the speed of the input signal. In other words, you hit it with a 300 hertz signal, it's going to move 300 times per second. It's not going to move faster than that. If it did, it would be playing a different wavelength. It's going to track the input signal, whatever it is. So it's not a matter of speed as far as it accelerating. It's a matter of speed and it's stopping. It's like you don't have any stored energy there. You hit it with the sound and then the signal stops, and then suddenly this thing stops. And you can see it in the spectral decay. The spectral decay is just, it just dies and it's done. Whereas everything else, especially you get into bigger woofers, you get a little more moving mass, and it does take a little bit of time for that to settle. So that's one more thing. So we got lightweight driver, fast settling time, phase coherency over a wide range, minimal baffle, rear firing driver, then some new technology. I haven't mentioned specifically yet what it is because some of you guys that think the earth is flat would completely freak out and think I'm selling snake oil. So let's just say it's new technology and it really makes a difference. And you're going to hear that at some point when you get to hear these speakers. You're going to say, holy cow. Whatever he did worked because it does what he says it does. So this model, that's what we've got going on there. And the results, new benchmark for stand mount speaker. Next model, we're going to step up to the 6.5 inch M165 small floor standing model. So we're going to run this thing clean to the floor. And we're going to keep the shape of it. Now, if you noticed when you saw the side of it a while ago, the front and the back are tilted like this. And in the stand mounted or the floor standing version, it's tilted again, but a little bit less. And it goes all the way to the floor. And it's going to 3 dB down in the low to mid 40s. And so a pretty good solid stand mount speaker and a pretty good solid little floor stander. Because it's got a rear firing driver, it will require these to be 3 feet or more out into the room. I mean, we're going after the audiophile top level market with these, not a versatility of sticking it in the corner or on the wall and on your desk. No, this is specifically top level, high end, get it out into the room. Now, Model 3, we're still kind of kicking around exactly how that's going to work. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to use one of the NQ drivers, which is one of the best sounding drivers that I've ever heard that is of this size. The quality of this, all the copper and the motor structure, everything that goes into this is some of the best vocals I've ever heard. Until you start looking at something this lightweight that's made just like it. So imagine a sealed box, kind of like the studio monitors, which this is using the studio monitor, with one of these, and we're going to continue to offset these off into the corner. In fact, we did a lot of test baffles to where we moved these incrementally 1/4 of an inch over each time until we found the best response on the baffle. So again, a lot of development work went into these. So that's why you see it pushed over to one side, because that's how it measured the best. So third model, imagine NQ driver below one of the LGKs, sealed box, and then probably 3 8-inch servo controlled woofers below. That's the plan, and we've got things in place to make that happen. And those 8-inch woofers will probably be on a U-shaped frame that's open baffle. So some pretty cool things coming in this product line. That top model is going to really be over the top. And even these first 2 models are going to be reasonably priced, crazy good. Wow, we're really excited about them. And I've put off doing any video on this until more things are in place and it's in production, and we're getting there. We're getting close. I would say early part of next year, I think end of the first quarter, hopefully we've got these out there. And so we'll talk more about them, and we'll follow this video. I want to follow this one with Ron, and I want to talk more about some of the development work, the naming, and how it sounds, and we'll try to do some sound clips for you guys to show you guys some of the things we're talking about when I'm talking about how something sounds, because we're actually catching some of that in the recordings. You're hearing the quality of the speed and the texture and the detail levels and things like that, and some of the openness even you're hearing in the recording. Now, what you can't hear back in any recording is what we're hearing live. What the recording is a copy of that, and then you're hearing it back through your system, which is not the same. It's like looking at a high-res photograph and then looking at a picture of that photograph taken from across the room and blown up. It's not the same as looking at the original, and it's not the same as hearing the original, because when you hear the sound clips, you don't hear the crazy imaging, the layering, the soundstage, the holographic effects. You don't hear unless you're here. So I may do some things where I bring people in and let them hear these things in order to buy them, or I'm going to be sending them out, or there's a whole bunch of cool stuff coming. and we're going to get to that in the next videos. But I wanted to lay this groundwork, lay a foundation, and give you guys a little bit of what's coming, because we've been working on this stuff, and it's a long road. Development and research and development of a new product takes a little bit of time. So if you've hung with me through this whole video and you've listened on the edge of your chair, wow, this is cool, I'm blown away by that. Thank you for watching the video. Thanks for hanging in this long. I know it's just a lot of technical stuff, and if you're into that, that's cool. I know a lot of people want an immediate answer, and they don't want to know all the specifics. They just want the answers, and they're going to hate it because I muddled through this in detail. But if you stuck with me, thank you very much. I appreciate all of you who watch my videos and all of you who call every day to GR Research and you tell me I watch all your videos. I really, really appreciate that. And if you haven't, please hit the subscribe button, and you'll get some notification of when these videos drop. That's it for this one. Look for more to come. This is fun times. You can tell I'm excited about it. We will see you guys in the next video.